He suspected that her husband was putting sleeping pills in her tea. One night, she threw them away and pretended to be asleep, and what she discovered left her in shock. The cool evening breeze from the Chicago wind swept through the kitchen window, carrying the distant hum of the city that never truly rested. For Megan Hartley, however, the world had shrunk to the confines of that cozy apartment in the Lincoln Park neighborhood, a haven she and her husband, Nathan Brooks, had built together. At 29, with a promising career as an architect, she considered herself a lucky woman. Married for 2 years, she saw in Nathan the embodiment of the ideal partner. He was the calm in the midst of her hectic routine, the safe harbor where she anchored her worries. Nathan was kind, almost reverent in his care, a man whose gestures seemed straight out of a romantic script. He remembered dates she herself forgot, prepared her breakfast just the way she liked it, and more recently had instituted a nightly ritual that, at first, seemed the pinnacle of his devotion, the herbal tea. Every night, promptly at 10, Nathan appeared with a steaming ceramic mug. "To help you unwind, my love, you work too hard," he would say, with that smile that had the power to disarm her. He boasted with an almost artisanal pride that he bought the blend at a farmer's market in Evanston, a spot he visited alone on some Saturday mornings. The composition, according to him, was a symphony of tranquility: chamomile to soothe, fennel for the stomach, mint to refresh, and a secret from the herbalist, a rare herb that guaranteed deep, restorative sleep. At first, Megan surrendered to that care. The floral aroma that filled the kitchen was comforting, and Nathan's brew was a balm for her weary soul. She drank the tea, felt an almost immediate and heavy drowsiness take over her body, and plunged into a dreamless sleep, a blackout that lasted until the shrill sound of the alarm the next morning. She woke up groggy, her head heavy, as if she'd crossed a night of partying, not rest. Nathan, invariably, was already up, smiling, with the coffee brewed. "Slept like a rock, huh?" he would comment, and she just nodded, attributing the lethargy to the accumulated stress of a major project she was leading. However, a subtle dissonance began to disrupt the harmony of that ritual. A taste, a bitter, chemical aftertaste that clung to the back of her tongue, completely different from the sweet herbal flavor one would expect from chamomile and fennel. It was a strange note, medicinal, that scratched the perfection of that elixir of love. At first she ignored it. It could be that secret from the herbalist, a quirk of nature, but the feeling of being doped in the morning intensified. Small memory lapses began to appear. Where had she left the car keys? Was she sure she'd saved the latest version of the project? Trivial things, but added up, they wove a web of uncertainty in her analytical mind. The suspicion, a silent worm, began to erode the foundation of her trust. Why did Nathan insist so much that she drink the tea every night without exception? Why did he sometimes hover in the kitchen, watching her drink to the last sip, with an intensity that bordered on control? The doubt, once planted, grew and took deep roots. Megan began to observe Nathan with different eyes, seeking cracks in the facade of the perfect husband. And she found them. She found them in his gaze, which sometimes seemed to evaluate her, measure her, as if she were an object of study. She found them in the way he dodged questions about his distant past, always with vague answers and charming smiles that changed the subject. The architect in her, accustomed to analyzing structures and foundations, sensed that the foundation of her marriage was compromised. The suspicion became a constant companion, a whisper in her ear that prevented her from truly relaxing. She needed proof, something concrete that would confirm or annihilate that anguish consuming her. The opportunity arose on a Tuesday night. Nathan entered the kitchen with the steaming mug, the familiar aroma filling the air. "Your nighttime calmer, honey," he said. Megan smiled, a smile that didn't reach her eyes, and took the mug with hands that trembled discreetly. She brought the cup to her lips, tilting it as if to drink, feeling the warmth of the steam on her face. "Ah, I forgot my phone in the living room. Be right back," said Nathan, turning away. It was the second she needed. In a quick and silent movement, she turned to the sink and poured the dark liquid down the drain. The faucet ran for a moment, washing away the traces. With her heart pounding against her ribs, a war drum announcing her silent rebellion, She sat back at the table holding the now empty mug. When Nathan returned, she raised the mug in a gesture of mission accomplished. Wow, I needed that. Went down fast tonight, she lied, her voice surprisingly steady. An unmistakable gleam of satisfaction passed through Nathan's eyes. He smiled, a broad and satisfied smile. Good, my love. Now you'll rest for real. That look, almost predatory in its satisfaction, was the confirmation she had feared. It wasn't care, it was control. It wasn't love, it was a plan. And that night, for the first time in months, Megan would go to bed with her mind terribly awake, ready to discover what secrets her husband kept in the darkness, while she slept the sleep of the just, or rather, the sleep of the drugged. The herbal tea wasn't a gift, it was a weapon, and she was determined to find out against whom or what that weapon was aimed. The drowsiness she displayed as she got up from the table was a masterpiece of acting. Every yawn was calculated, every dragged step toward the bedroom was a performance worthy of a stage. I think the tea's already kicking in. I'm falling asleep, murmured Megan, her voice slurred, as she passed Nathan in the living room. He watched her climb the stairs, a satisfied smile playing on his lips, and turned his attention back to the TV, turning up the volume. For him, the routine was fulfilled. His wife was on her way to another night of programmed unconsciousness. But for Megan, the night was just beginning. Lying in bed with her eyes closed and her breathing steady, she was a statue of vigilance. The sound of the TV coming from downstairs was her only anchor in reality, a mundane noise that contrasted with the storm brewing in her chest. Each minute dragged like an hour. The fear was a living creature, with cold claws nesting in her stomach, but the determination was a fire that kept her warm, that impelled her not to yield to panic. She needed to know. She needed to unravel the mystery hidden behind the facade of the perfect husband. It was past midnight when the sound of the TV finally ceased. The silence that followed was even more deafening. Megan sharpened her ears, catching every minimal noise in the house. She heard Nathan's footsteps on the wooden stairs, climbing slowly, methodically. Her heart skipped a beat, a discordant and loud thump, and she was sure he could hear it. She held her breath, forcing her body into absolute immobility. The bedroom door opened with an almost imperceptible creak. She felt his presence in the doorway, a shadow watching her in the dim light. How long did he stand there? 10 seconds? A minute? For Megan, it was an eternity suspended in time, a test of nerves that stretched her sanity to the limit. Then she heard her name, a venomous whisper in the silence. Megan? She didn't move, not a muscle. He waited, and then the whisper came again a little closer. Megan, are you asleep? The silence was her answer. Satisfied, he didn't approach the bed further. To her astonishment and growing terror, his footsteps retreated, but not toward the bathroom or his side of the bed. He went back into the hallway, and instead of going down, his steps headed in the opposite direction, toward the back of the house. And then she heard the unmistakable sound of the door leading to the garage being opened and closed with surgical care. The garage, a place that for her was just a storage for tools, boxes of old projects, and the car. For Nathan, apparently, it was a sanctuary of secrets. The curiosity, now stronger than the fear, impelled her to get up. Barefoot, moving with the lightness of a ghost, she left the bed, the cold floor under her feet sending a shiver up her spine. She crossed the dark hallway, each floorboard a potential traitor that could creak and betray her presence. Upon reaching the garage door, she stopped. A sliver of cold, bluish light escaped from under it, cutting through the darkness. With her heart in her mouth, she turned the knob with torturous slowness, opening the door just enough to create a small gap through which she could peek. The scene that revealed itself to her eyes made her blood run cold. The light wasn't from the fluorescent ceiling lamp, but from the screen of a laptop she had never seen before, a slim and dark device resting on an improvised workbench. Nathan was with his back to her, completely absorbed in his task. He wasn't the relaxed man watching TV on the couch, he was someone else. His shoulders were tense, his movements quick, precise, economical. He typed furiously on a burner phone, one of those old ones without internet access, and next to the laptop a small portable printer spat out sheets of paper with a low, constant hum. He picked up each sheet, analyzed it under the screen's light, and organized it into a folder. What were those papers? Contracts? Documents? Megan's mind spun, trying to process her husband's metamorphosis. The man who prepared chamomile teas for her was the same man operating that clandestine office in the middle of the night. Suddenly he stopped, his head tilted, as if he had heard something. Megan held her breath, the air burning in her lungs, her entire body petrified. She could see the outline of his face turning slowly in her direction. Panic engulfed her. In an instant, the image of being discovered, of having to confront that shadowy and unknown version of her husband, terrified her more than anything else. Without thinking, she backed away, spinning on her heels. The movement was too quick. Her bare foot bumped into a small plant pot in the hallway, which wobbled dangerously before stabilizing. The sound, though minimal, seemed like thunder in the house's silence. She didn't wait to see if he had heard. She ran back to the bedroom, the fear giving her a speed she didn't know she possessed, stumbling over her own feet. She threw herself onto the bed, pulling the comforter up to her chin, her body trembling uncontrollably. She closed her eyes tightly, pretending the deep sleep he believed she was in. Minutes later, she heard his footsteps coming up from the garage, faster this time. He stopped again at the bedroom door. She could feel him there, scrutinizing the darkness, trying to discern if the noise he heard was just a nighttime sound of the house or something more. The wait was agonizing. Finally, he seemed convinced and entered the room, lying down beside her on the bed. Megan remained immobile, but sleep was a million miles away. She was lying next to a stranger, a meticulous, secretive stranger, and she now was sure dangerous. The garage wasn't a storage, it was his lair. And she had just peeked into the abyss. The night dragged on in a torturous vigil. Lying next to the man whose deep and rhythmic breathing now sounded like a threat, Megan felt every fiber of her being vibrate in a state of maximum alert. Sleep was a luxury she could no longer afford. The image of Nathan in the garage, operating with cold and secret efficiency, was burned into her mind. That wasn't her husband. It was a shell, a persona carefully constructed to hide the man who truly inhabited her home. When dawn broke, with the first grey light of Chicago filtering through the window, she already had a plan. The fear from the previous night had solidified into an icy resolve. She was no longer the naive and trusting wife. She was an investigator in her own home, an adversary in a game whose rules she was just beginning to understand. That morning, the normality of breakfast was a grotesque farce. Nathan's smile, his "Good morning, my love," the kiss on her forehead, everything seemed contaminated by the lie. Megan responded with an impeccable performance, claiming a slight headache, a remnant of the heavy sleep he had provided her. As soon as he left for his supposed job, the house became the stage for Megan's operation. She acted with the same precision she had seen in him the night before. A quick trip to a famous electronics store in the Loop, and she returned with her equipment. A micro camera, small as a screw head, with night recording capability and audio transmission. The architect, accustomed to thinking in angles, structures, and blind spots, found the perfect spot in the garage. Hidden among the old tools hanging on a wooden panel, the tiny lens had a panoramic view of the metal cabinet and the workbench Nathan used as his clandestine office. The installation was feverish, her hands trembling not from fear but from raw adrenaline. Every second counted. The wait during the day was a new kind of torture. At work, she looked at the building blueprints, but saw only the layout of her own home, imagining the secrets each room might hide. At night, the tea ritual repeated itself. This time, when she poured the bitter liquid down the sink, she didn't feel panic, but a dark power. She was in control. She feigned drowsiness, went up to the bedroom and lay down, but her mind was miles away, connected to a small electronic eye in the garage. Hours passed. The house's silence was heavy, dense. And then, like clockwork, she heard his footsteps. The same ritual as the previous night. The wait at the door, the whisper of her name, the descent to the garage. This time, however, Megan didn't need to move. On her phone, hidden under the comforter, she opened the camera app. The grainy black and white image appeared, sharp and terribly clear. There he was. Nathan, or whoever he was, opened the metal cabinet with a key he pulled from inside his own shoe. The first thing he did was remove stacks of cash, $50 and $100 bills, which he counted with astonishing speed, wetting his finger on his tongue. The amount was obscene, far larger than any savings they had as a couple. Next, he pulled out several folders. He opened one and began leafing through documents. The camera wasn't powerful enough to read what was written, but she could see the format. They looked like copies of identification documents, contracts, bank statements. He turned on the laptop and the portable printer, repeating the secret ballet from the previous night. The scene by itself was already incriminating, a vivid portrait of a double life. But the real blow, the one that would make Megan's ground open into a bottomless abyss, was still to come. His burner phone rang. The sound, captured by the camera's sensitive microphone, was clear and invasive. Nathan answered, and his voice, reaching Megan's ears through the headphones, was different. It had lost the velvety and gentle tone he used with her. It was curt, direct, laced with a subtle accent she had never noticed before. "I'm busy," he said. There was a pause, and then a female voice replied from the other end. The voice was impatient, demanding. "Busy. David, you told me you'd finish everything this week." David. The name echoed in Megan's mind, a violent dissonance. It wasn't Nathan. It was David. And the woman on the other end. Who was she? David's response was a low growl. "I'm handling it, Nicole. Calm down. Things need to be done the right way." Nicole, the woman's name, and his tone with her. It wasn't that of a simple business contact. There was an intimacy there, a complicity forged in shared secrets. Megan felt the air escape her. A mistress. It wasn't just a double life of financial crimes. It was a betrayal on a level she could barely comprehend. She continued listening, paralyzed, as the conversation unfolded, each word a nail in her emotional coffin. "The final cleanup will be soon," he said, and the expression "final cleanup" sounded sinister, definitive. "Don't worry. This weekend I'll be there with you. We'll celebrate." Nicole's voice softened, becoming seductive. "I miss you, my love. Don't take too long." "I won't," he replied, and his tone also changed, becoming laden with an intimate promise. He hung up. For a long moment he stood still, staring at the laptop screen. Then he let out a low laugh, a cold laugh devoid of any joy. It was the laugh of a predator satisfied with his prey. Megan ripped the headphones out as if they burned. The sound of her own blood pulsing in her ears was deafening. The marriage, the love, the security, everything had disintegrated in a matter of minutes. She wasn't the wife of Nathan Brooks. She was the next victim of a con man named David, a man who had a partner, a mistress, and a plan that involved a final cleanup. And she, Megan, was what needed to be cleaned. The question was no longer, "What is my husband hiding?" The question now was, "How am I going to survive this?" The initial shock gave way to a cold fury, a cutting clarity that sharpened her thoughts. Megan didn't cry. Tears seemed a luxury, an indulgence she couldn't afford. The woman who woke up the next morning wasn't the same one who had installed the camera the night before. The pain of betrayal was a live ember in her chest, but over it, a layer of ice formed. The determination not to be the victim. She was an architect. Her whole life was about building, about understanding structures, and, when necessary, about demolishing them safely. And the structure of lies that David had built around her was about to be demolished, brick by brick. She spent the next 2 days in a state of hyper-awareness, every gesture and word a piece of theater. She was the loving wife, a bit tired, completely oblivious to the darkness nesting beside her in bed. He, in turn, seemed more relaxed, almost euphoric, like an actor preparing for the final act of his play. The bomb, disguised as casual news, came on Thursday night. Megan was in the kitchen washing dishes, the running water a white noise that barely drowned out the buzz of her thoughts. David entered, dried his hands on a dish towel, and hugged her from behind, planting a kiss on her neck. The gesture, which before would have made her smile, now made her stiffen inside. "Honey, I need to tell you something," he began, his voice laced with that false casualness she now knew how to decipher. "A last-minute tech conference came up in Denver. Company thing, I have to go this weekend, Friday to Sunday, just 2 days." Denver. The word hit her like a punch. It wasn't to Denver he was going. He was going to Nicole's arms. He was going to celebrate. The lie was so blatant, so insulting in its simplicity, that Megan had to grip the edge of the sink, to not turn and confront him right there. Instead, she took a deep breath, turned with a rehearsed smile and said, "Oh, that's a shame, love. But work is work, right? It's fine." The ease with which he accepted her response, the relief that flickered in his eyes, was another stab. He underestimated her. He saw her as an easy obstacle to circumvent, a disposable piece on his board. On Friday, she helped him pack a small suitcase, a farce within the farce. She watched him put in 2 dress shirts, a pair of shoes, a toiletry bag, all to keep up appearances. The goodbye kiss at the door was the hardest act of her life. Feeling his lips on hers, knowing those same lips would whisper promises to another woman, knowing those hands holding her were stained with crimes, was nauseating. "I love you. Take care," he said. "I love you too." "Have a good trip," she replied, her voice a thread. As soon as his car turned the corner and disappeared, Megan's mask fell. She didn't waste a second. The house, now her exclusive territory, became the center of her investigation. The first target, the garage. She went down the stairs not with the fear of the first time, but with the determination of a soldier in enemy territory. The metal cabinet was locked, as expected, but Megan was methodical. Where would a man like David hide a key? Not on the main keychain, not in an obvious place. She thought of his movements, the way he bent down, the shoe. She remembered seeing him pull the key from the shoe in the recording. But which shoe? She went to their closet, her heart pounding. She looked at his row of shoes, all expensive, impeccable. She began checking one by one, sticking her hand inside each pair. In the third, an Italian leather loafer. Her fingers touched something cold and metallic hidden under the insole. The key. A somber triumph coursed through her. With the key in hand, she returned to the garage. The click of the lock opening was the most satisfying sound she had ever heard. The metal door opened, revealing the serpent's lair. What she found surpassed her worst nightmares. It wasn't just money and some documents. It was a meticulous file of life destruction. There were folders, each labeled with a woman's name. The first one she picked up had Lauren Mitchell on it. Inside, a copy of an ID of a smiling woman with brown hair, in the same age range as her. There were bank statements showing a joint account with a Brian Carter, one of David's aliases, she supposed. And the worst, loan contracts for huge amounts, all signed by Lauren, with the money deposited into that joint account, which was now zeroed out. There was another folder, Kayla Reynolds. The same story. A young, independent woman with a career, and the same pattern of financial exploitation, photos, documents, contracts. He didn't just steal, he created a complete dossier on his victims. Then she saw the folder with her own name, Megan Hartley. Her stomach churned. With trembling hands she opened it. There was everything. Copies of her documents, which she assumed he had photographed while she slept, drugged. Copies of her pay stubs, which he probably accessed on her laptop, and to her horror, drafts of loan contracts already filled out with her data, just awaiting a forged signature. He was in the final phase of his plan with her. He was preparing to give the final blow, to bury her in debt and then disappear, as he had done with the others. While organizing the folders back into the metal box, her fingers touched something different at the bottom. They were 2 more folders, but thinner, almost empty. One had the label Hannah L and the other Brooke S. Curious, she opened them. Inside each, just an ID copy and some surveillance photos, similar to the others. But there were no loan contracts, no bank statements, no trail of a completed financial scam. The folders seemed unfinished. A chill ran down Megan's spine, a premonition she couldn't name. Why were these different? What happened to Hannah and Brooke for their files to be interrupted? The absence of a financial crime in those folders was, somehow, more frightening than its presence in the others. The photos in the folders were all of women with a similar profile. Young, successful, with an appearance that somehow reminded her of herself. They were a harem of victims, a catalogue of lives he had invaded and destroyed. He wasn't just a con artist. He was a serial predator, and marriage was his hunting weapon. The final cleanup he had mentioned on the phone with Nicole now made a terrible sense. After sucking everything he could, he needed to ensure his victims couldn't speak, couldn't report him. What happened to them after he disappeared? The question hung in the musty air of the garage, laden with a deadly implication. Megan closed the folder with her name, her heart heavy as lead. The anger and fear mixed into a potent and dangerous emotion. She wouldn't be just another name in a folder. She would be the last. She would be the one to bring him down. With the evidence in hand, she knew exactly what to do next. With the folders under her arm, wrapped in a black garbage bag to avoid drawing attention, Megan left her own house like a fugitive. The world outside, the bustling city of Chicago, seemed indifferent to the cataclysm that had just happened in her life. Every face that passed her on the street was a reminder of how her reality had become a private and isolated nightmare. Her first instinct was to call the police, but a hesitation stopped her. What would she say? That her husband was a con artist? They might treat her as a suspicious wife, a domestic dispute. She needed more than suspicions and documents. She needed an ally, someone who would listen without judgment. And there was only one person she trusted blindly: Alexis. Alexis, her best friend since architecture school, was her opposite in almost everything. Where Megan was methodical and reserved, Alexis was impulsive and fiercely protective. Upon hearing Megan's trembling voice on the phone, Alexis didn't hesitate. "Where are you? I'm coming now." They met at a discreet cafe in Wicker Park, a place they didn't frequent, to ensure anonymity. As soon as Alexis arrived and saw Megan's pale face and the folder she placed on the table, she knew it was serious. Megan told everything. The story came out in a torrential and whispered flow: the tea, the bitter taste, the garage, the camera, the name David, the mistress Nicole, the fake trip, and finally, the folders. As Megan spoke, Alexis's face transformed, going from concern to disbelief and finally to a controlled fury. When Megan opened the folders and spread the evidence on the table, Alexis just said one word: bastard. But Alexis was pragmatic. "Meg, this is way bigger than a simple police case. Fraud, identity theft, conspiracy. This is federal crime. We need to go to the FBI." The idea scared Megan, but Alexis was firm. "You're not alone in this. I'll go with you." The next morning, the two entered the imposing building of the FBI field office in Chicago. With every step, Megan felt the weight of the decision she was making. She was about to hand over the man she had shared a bed with, the man she had loved, to justice. In the office of an experienced agent, with a tired but attentive gaze, Megan recounted her story. The agent listened patiently, without interrupting. When she finished and presented the folders, his gaze changed. He picked up one of the fake IDs, with David's photo under the name Brian Carter, and examined it closely. He stood up and left the room without a word. The minutes of waiting were agony. When the agent returned, he wasn't alone. He brought with him another agent and a different, much bulkier folder. He placed a photo on the table. It was a photo of David, younger, with an arrogant look. "Do you know this man?" asked the agent. "Yes, it's Nathan, or David," Megan replied. The agent nodded. "His name is David Reed. Fugitive for nearly a decade. He's what we call a high-risk romance scammer. He seduces successful women, marries them, creates a web of dependency and trust, and then destroys them financially before disappearing. He's hit victims in California, New York, the Midwest. But he's always been a ghost. We've never had such concrete evidence, a smoking gun. You, Megan, gave us what we needed." The validation was a relief, but the confirmation of his dangerousness brought the fear back with full force. Then, the agent made the proposal that would change everything. "David returns Sunday night. We want to catch him in the act with a confession. For that, we need your cooperation. We need you to confront him with a wire." The idea of confronting him, of being in the same environment knowing everything, was terrifying. But the image of the other women in the folders, of Lauren, of Kayla, gave her the strength she needed. She wasn't doing this just for herself. She was doing it for all of them. On Sunday night, Megan's house was no longer a home. It was a trap. Plainclothes agents were positioned in discreet cars on the street. A tactical team was on standby a few blocks away, listening to everything in real time. Alexis was with them in the surveillance van, a silent presence of support. Megan wore a small blouse with a tiny microphone hidden in the seam. When she heard his car entering the garage, her heart seemed to stop for a moment. She took a deep breath, remembering the agent's instructions. Be natural, but firm. Lead him to the confession. He entered the house with the same smile as always, bringing a pizza box. Surprise! Thought I'd make your life easier tonight. His normality was psychopathic. They sat down to eat, and the silence was dense. Megan could barely swallow. Finally, she dropped her fork and looked him in the eyes. The time had come. How was the trip? She asked, her voice steadier than she expected. Tiring, lots of work, he lied without hesitation. It was the cue. Megan took a deep breath and dropped the first bomb. I know about the tea, Nathan. Or should I say David? His smile froze. The name David, spoken by her, hit him like an electric shock. For a second, the mask of the perfect husband fell, revealing the cornered predator underneath. His eyes narrowed, becoming cold and calculating. What are you talking about, Megan? Are you feeling okay? But she didn't back down. I know about the garage. I know about the documents. And I know about Nicole. The mistress's name was the final blow. He leaned back in the chair and a frightening transformation took over him. The farce was over. He let out a low laugh, a laugh without humor, just contempt. So, the little mouse finally came out of the hole. You're smarter than I thought, but you have no idea what you're up against. The veiled threat sent a shiver down her spine, but she held firm, her voice laden with rightful pain. How many women before me? He stood up, walking slowly around the table like a shark circling its prey. His arrogance was boundless. Enough, he said, savoring the word. It's an efficient business model. I marry, open accounts, take out loans, pull out everything I can. Nicole cleans the money and then I vanish. And you, my dear Megan, you would be just another on the list. The most lucrative, I must admit. The confession was clear, brutal. He approached her, his face contorted into a mask of fury at being discovered. But now you've ruined everything, he hissed, his voice low and dangerous. Ruined my retirement. He took a slow step toward her, his hand sliding into his pants pocket. The predator was about to make his final pounce. Megan held her breath, her body paralyzed, waiting for the scream, the explosion, the violence she saw in movies. But what happened was silence. An almost imperceptible click from the hallway, and the house plunged into sudden and absolute darkness. The power cut was so instantaneous that David stopped, disoriented. For a second, the only sound in the room was their panting breaths. Before their eyes could adjust, a cold white emergency light flooded the room, coming from a point on the ceiling that Megan didn't remember existing. In that ghostly light, the scene had transformed. David was no longer hunting. He was the prey. Shadows had materialized into men. An agent was posted at the kitchen door, another blocking the way to the stairs. There were no shouts, just the calm and lethal voice of the agent, who was now standing beside the dining table, where seconds before there had been no one. It's over, David, he said, the gun pointed steadily at the con artist's chest. Hands where I can see them. Slowly. David looked around, his face a mask of disbelief and contained fury. The trap hadn't been noisy. It had been surgical, silent, inevitable. His eyes met Megan's, and in them there was no more arrogance, just the pure hatred of a caged animal. You, he began to say. But one of the agents advanced quickly, and with precise and trained movements immobilized and handcuffed him without any fuss. As they led him out, amid that professional silence, he turned his face to her one last time, and his lips formed a mute promise, more frightening than any shout. This isn't over. But Megan, feeling the weight of months of fear finally beginning to dissipate, knew it was. She wasn't a victim. She was the architect of the perfect trap, a survivor. The sound of the sirens fading into the night was the period at the end of one chapter and the beginning of a deafening silence. The house, which once was a home, now was a crime scene, violated not only by the law agents, but by the very lie that had sustained it. While the FBI forensics team catalogued the evidence in the garage, turning her private nightmare into a formal criminal process, Megan sat on the couch, wrapped in a blanket that one of the agents offered her. Alexis was by her side, a silent pillar of strength, her presence an anchor in the storm. The agent approached, his face tired but with a gleam of respect in his eyes. "The investigations confirmed what we suspected," he said, his voice grave. "Nathan Brooks, or rather David Reed, is the head of one of the largest romance scam networks we've ever seen in the country. Nicole, the accomplice, was arrested in a luxury apartment in Miami, trying to empty the accounts. We found records linking them to at least 8 confirmed victims in 5 different states. And the scariest part, Megan, 2 of them are missing. Your final cleanup was more literal than we imagined." Those words hit her with the force of a physical blow. Missing. The abyss she had glimpsed was even deeper and more deadly. She hadn't just escaped financial ruin, she had escaped death. The trial was a media spectacle that she followed from afar, protected by a witness program. David, stripped of his charm, revealed himself as a cold and calculating monster, denying everything to the end. Nicole, in an attempt to reduce her sentence, confessed the sordid details of the operation, painting David as a master manipulator who had seduced her into the world of crime. The evidence, however, was irrefutable. The folders, the recordings, the testimonies of other victims that emerged after the arrest, and the financial trails linking the couple to a fortune built on broken hearts and destroyed lives. Both were sentenced to long terms for fraud, identity theft, money laundering, and conspiracy. David would still face trials for the disappearances, now investigated as homicides. For Megan, justice in the courts was just the beginning of her own sentence, rebuilding a life from rubble. She sold the apartment in Lincoln Park, a place haunted by ghosts of a false love. She left Chicago, the city that held all her memories, the good and the poisoned ones, and she moved to the coast, to a small town where the sound of the ocean might, perhaps, drown out the echoes of the lies. The first years were a desert. Therapy helped her navigate the dunes of betrayal and trauma. Sleep was a minefield of nightmares. Trusting someone, especially a man, seemed an impossibility. She dedicated herself to work, designing houses with ocean views, solid, transparent structures with deep and honest foundations. Everything her marriage hadn't been. She built for others the security that had been stolen from her. Over time, the acute pain turned into a scar, a mark that would always be there, but that no longer prevented her from moving. Therapy helped her rebuild her emotional foundations, but contact with other victims in anonymous online forums ignited the flame. Reading stories so similar to hers, the impotence she felt began to transmute into a cold and focused fury. Anger gave way to purpose. She had survived, but surviving wasn't enough. She needed to fight. The decision was the most radical of her life. The architect who built with concrete and steel decided she would build with laws and justice. At 31, she enrolled in law school. It was a grueling path. The early mornings that once were populated by nightmares were now filled with penal codes and procedural manuals. The methodical discipline she used to design buildings was redirected to the discipline of the bar exam. There were moments of doubt, exhaustion, feeling out of place among colleagues a decade younger. But the image of the folders in the garage, of those women's names, was the fuel that kept her from giving up. Every legal article she memorized was one more brick in the wall she built between her vulnerable past and her future as a hunter. 5 years later, graduated and exhaustively prepared, she took the exam for the FBI. The day her name appeared on the list of approved candidates wasn't a moment of euphoria, but of deep and solemn peace. It wasn't a victory, it was the completion of a project. Her true absolution didn't come from the court that convicted David, but from the system that accepted her into its ranks. She had transformed the greatest wound of her life into the armor she would use to protect others. Today, Special Agent Megan Hartley no longer designs houses. She dismantles criminal organizations. Specialized in the unit combating fraud and cybercrimes, she has become a silent legend within the Bureau. Her ability to sniff out lies, to see the fissures in the most perfect narratives, is incomparable. She looks at a case and doesn't see just numbers and transactions. She sees the victim, feels their fear, recognizes the manipulation, because she once lived there. She turned her greatest weakness into her most powerful weapon. In her free time, she founded a non-profit organization that offers legal and psychological support to victims of romance scams, a beacon for women lost in the fog of manipulation. She never married again, but built a family of friends, of survivors, a sisterhood forged in fire. And so Megan's story shows us that even from the deepest darkness, it's possible to find strength to rewrite one's own destiny. Now, I really want to hear from you all. What did you think of this story? Tell me in the comments which city you're watching from. I love seeing how far my stories reach. If you liked the video, don't forget to give it a like to support the channel, and of course subscribe so you don't miss any of the upcoming stories. A hug and see you next time.